Hello again. I have, I guess you could say it's long time no see. Not that there's many of you to see, at least not in this current time of recording. But it's been a year since I've put anything out on the internet, and I was looking through my dead laptop. Now named him Aguilar, but he's far dead now. But I was looking through his drive as far as like anything I could salvage from it, and I found an hour long raw audio form, an Audacity recording that I recorded in my mother's closet because there was a lot of clothes in there, and it insulated it really well. Obviously, right now I'm not in a very insulated place, a lot of echo, but and I'm at a desk, so if you hear creaking, that's what that is. But yeah, I saw it and I was like, "There's no way," because I remember I had recorded it over Christmas break between my first semester of college and the second semester of that first year, and it was an hour long, and it was too long for me at the time to reasonably upload. Um, just because of my editing experience, I have since taken on responsibility as editing of a kids podcast, the name of which I won't necessarily disclose. Um, but how do I put it? But my skills as an audio editor have greatly improved. I will not say that my video editing skills have necessarily improved along with it. There's a lag there, but I took a look at it and I decided I wanted to take another crack at this YouTube thing. I really really enjoyed it, and was a really a great way of expressing my work. I have not stopped working on Olfasu since that time period. I have reasonably, I think I have worked on Olfasu nearly every day of my life for the past 2.5 years. Um, give or take, obviously, not every day. Uh, there's obviously been breaks, and like the amount of which that I worked on it differed depending on each day. But regardless, it has been a good chunk of my life. It has been a tenth of my life, nearly, has been making my word. Thinking about it that way, a tenth of my life has been spent writing this concept. Um, and obviously, since I've been working on it since for the entire year, for another entire year since the original recording of this video, obviously I have retconned so much. I have written and rewritten so many things for the sake of logical and moral coherence and the themes of the narrative and everything else, because I am writing a narrative now. It's not just a world building exercise, but I'm actually taking my hand to storycraft and am intending to write an actual lengthy narrative. But and I realize this is a long intro. This is mainly just for my nostalgia's sake, not especially for any viewership. If you do find this sort of, I don't know, whatever you like, however you would like your videos, very long or whatever you want to call it, this is definitely your material. I could rant forever, but for the sake of brevity and not having hours and hours and hours of talking, as I have done with certain friends, and just explaining certain concepts of the world, had a whiteboard and everything. Felt like I was a teacher or something. Um, but in any case, I wanted to edit this video for my own sake, for nostalgia and for archiving's sake, just as a benchmark. Maybe a sort of return in force to this medium that I like a lot, and hopefully I won't have. Which originally it was stopped because of perceived inability. Burnout also was a major factor. I didn't know how to manage burnout. I'm not going to say I'm a professional or anything now at managing burnout in the present, but I have grown a lot in managing burnout. So Fundamentally, I think I am in a better position. I have a lot more maturity in just 1 year. I've grown a lot as a human being. Not necessarily that you care, perhaps. Um, I haven't given you reason to care. Um, but I am glad that if you are watching this video and you are this far along, I congratulate you. Either that or you skipped ahead. But even then, you don't even know what I'm offering. So why would you skip ahead, right? Um, but I probably will not have such ranting long intros again. Um, just for the sake of things, obviously. But I'm not expecting anybody to watch this hour-long video. So if you do, bravo. Props. Give yourself a pat on the back, I guess. Take a break, maybe. I'm not saying like you can't handle the information, but just maybe you should take a break. Personally, I have limited my screen time for the sake of productivity. But in any case, I will stop rambling and present to you the hour-long, probably hour and 20-minute long, hour and 30-minute long, maybe even. Basic Iceberg to Olfasu. There will be a lot of revisions. I will be seeding and disseminating revisions where necessary for the sake of integrity. If this is the first video you've seen of me, then this is going to be very different. I'm not going to overproduce it. It's not worth it for this hour-long video. I'm just going to be honest with you. Since it is just for my own sake, I'm not going to overproduce it. But and I'm going to let these long ranting segments stay inside, probably with minimal editing. So it's going to be a very raw, very untouched video for the most part. But in any case, if you're along for the ride, I'm grateful. Thank you for your time. And I think this time I actually am going to transition into it. If I'm not, I'm going to cut myself somewhere.
So, long time no see. It's good to be back after a few months. Higher education is kind of distracting. This is on Olfasu, again, because there's that much material to cover, and I didn't have nearly enough time to create a lengthy video, but now I have time. And we will be covering the entire iceberg, hopefully. This will be an entire recap of the whole history, from the very beginning to the present day, as best as I can reasonably surmise it, and I hope I can share this world that I enjoy so much with you all.
I think it's a reasonable departure already from this video to say that whenever I mention Olfasu, Olfasu was originally the name for the world. Ol literally coming from the Olfasun word for elderly or old. Genuinely, it was a complete, and like obviously you could say one thing or the other about the linguistic similarities to old or old in English. But since then, meanings have changed and everything else. That was the primitive version of it. And then there was Fosu, Olfasu. Fosu meaning world. And so originally the term Olfasu was meant to designate the world. But now in the current iteration of the world, the worldbuilding project, which its proper term is Ifinu, which is a much broader term for the universe. Is also called Xom. I use Xom quite a few times. Xom is the literal divine word for all things. So Xom is also another word for it. But in any case, whenever I mention Olfasu in the current timeline, the post retcon, if you want to call it that, if you want to designate it into periods or periods of canon, in the current timeline, Olfasu is a specific nation um, of the Ananian people. Uh, Not going to get into every detail, but basically there were three different distinct ethnic groups that came out of the departure or exodus, whatever you want to call it, during the Virum Kigilkheim, or the year of departure, or age of departure, whatever you want to call it. And Ulfos was one of the nations that came out of that. The other one was the Murtherans. They came to the north. They went to the north and they established a more clannish society. And then the Syriacs, they went out to the west and remained nomads for a long time before developing the Ashkan, Gargan, and like a lot of the Un nations, if you see that, come from that similar linguistic root for Un, meaning land, designation of the suffix at the end. Ananian languages are all about suffixes and everything like that. Very long, lengthy consonant clusters, whole thing. Anyway, long tangent. Yes, long tangent. Sorry, I was searching for the word. Back to the regular video.
The Thogan, or Ifo, came screaming from the ether like meteors, crashing onto the surface of Olfasu and debatably the other isles in the archipelago. They are assumed to be of Aragonite stock, so they would be of the Examian mortals as opposed to Latoran mortals.
Oh wow. I'm just now realizing as I'm recording, because I'm actively recording these, as I'm listening to it via the editing, to proofread in a way. I want to make something clear here. This is probably going to actually be up to 2 hours because I'm probably going to have to revise just as much material as there actually is from the original recording. But in any case, yes, this concept, the Thogan or the IFO. So originally, the IFO were a much bigger deal than they are now. They were originally from a distant, either metaphysical plane or literal distant planet, extraterrestrial esque in nature, given their screaming entry into via comets and meteors and such into the world of Ifinu. But fundamentally, this was changed. Their home was known as Thomrogan, and them being a Roganite stock never changed. But what that meant changed after I started doing some study and started organizing systematically the metaphysics of the setting and getting all of that figured out. I had to place the Thogan into a different position as beings, and so they are now they were now created unintentionally by the Willows, which were an old concept in my original anthology that I wrote at near the beginning of the world's inception, which is nothing like what it is now. And to make it simple, they are like these people or entities made of lightning, and they love playing games, they love chasing each other, they love playing sports in the sky, and they're running around at lightning speed, create storms and thunderstorms. But in any case, they were playing a great game over the continent at one point. The continent which would eventually be the continent where most things would happen in the world. Sort of a middle continent between, I guess, to the Ananians, the entire continent was Olfasu. Regardless of cultures, though the nation Olfasu is separate from the designation for the world Olfasu, for the continent Olfasu. Complicated, I know, but the term shifted due to linguistic differences even among the Ananian people. But in any case, yes, they had this massive game over the continent, and it grew so intense. Then lightning struck around so much that that's how it was said the Thogan came to be. was via this charged energy, which is not just lightning, because they were literal beings. Some of them fell to the earth, and unintentionally, um, metaphysically, there's this concept called the breath, which is the ability to create sapient life. And due to the emotional intensity and the rigor with which they were playing this game, um, there ended up being so much pneuma that they unintentionally charged the ground, uh, and from that charged clay and dirt formed the Thogan. Also with the air. Actually, no, I don't believe it was the earth. I believe it was the air. There was this hypercharged air with the pneuma, and then in lightning bolts, the Thogan came down and manifested as sapient creatures. Um, very ornate, very flowery, very myth, but it that is the way that it actually happened. There are several misinterpretations of it, and there's a lot of missing details, but that is how they actually function now. That is who they are now, and they are also the creators of the Ananyankin, but not via the breath. They are the creators of the Ananyankin via oh, ooh, what was I thinking? I'm trying to remember the concept. Um, they were created via intentional early carnomancies. Something similar. I think they corrupted something. I haven't fully fleshed that out yet. Um, but yes, they created the Ananyankin and to police their empire. And I'm going on a wide tangent here. But I also mentioned taking a short little drop or trip over to another concept that I address in this short little area. Um, the the Zombie versus Latoran mortal concept is completely non applicable anymore. The Latora were an early concept, and you can even see it in my videos. I talked about them. The Latora were an early concept of the world, which allowed me to write from an incredibly microscopic or macroscopic view of things with deities that existed above it. And ultimately, I decided less on a more Lovecraftian or detached cosmic horror, and opted more for a more imminent myth style story in world rather than this incredibly detached narrative. Um, Simply because I grew disillusioned with Lovecraftian horror. Not because it was bad, but I lost its interest. It was what got me into fiction. As far as writing fiction, that was what I wanted to write. But after dabbling in it, I realized that it was not what I wanted to write, but it was my gateway. In any case, yes, Examian versus Latoran mortals. Latoran mortals were mortals that were of a result of the anti-entropic properties of the Latora and their generative nature. And then Examian mortals were mortals created by the gods directly, and or lesser gods, pantheons, whatever you want to call it, right? Instead, the Latora no longer exists as a concept. I thought it was an interesting concept, and I may use it in another story, another setting, but I just don't feel like it fits the narrative of this world. It feels like it's too disjointed, and but yes, that is the explanation and revision of this section.
Their first landing place was the northern tundra of Murther, or at least according to Tendranus, who uses this poem from the Autonomous Thogan, a book of Thogish religious literature, to help validate this claim. From fire to flash of powder white, and from white come ash-filled droplets, which wet my skin with a crass chill bite, and freeze the sclera neath my eyelids. This describes the long and harsh winter that these early comers to Olfasu faced immediately after landing, as the entirety of Olfasu was enduring an ice age at the time.
Re, Regarding the Ice Age, um, I will be entirely transparent. I had I wrote it out of, I want to say, um not necessity, but out of sheer depth. In one of my stories, I have an entire what is an attempt at an entire written history of Olfasu, an early concept, um, in which most of it was actually established. It wasn't so much a chronicle as it was an actual finding out of the history, and before even the world timeline was done, um, which it roughly composes 5,000 or so years of actual entire history now to the present narrative. But this ice age, um, from the clues that I understand from the original writing, right? I tend to something strange about the way I write, I suppose, is that I actually let the writing sort of become itself in a way. There's the basic undertone and moral framework, not necessarily moral, but a logical framework. There's the rules the world follows. There's the causes for things, and so subconsciously it gets integrated, and you write um, subconsciously according to those things, and you let them resolve themselves. And if you have a good framework, you have a good story, or good world building, right? Um, I'm not claiming that my work is either of those, um, but that is how I write, and ultimately, I have around. Oh, how do I think about this? My brain is it is late. My brain is losing steam. I think I need to go to bed, but then I'm probably bothering roommates. Uh, but fundamentally, the ice age was likely caused by the departure. And if I have a chance to revise what the departure is, I will absolutely say so. But I'm going to say it's a side effect of the departure, if not actually a side effect of the Belos um, and their whole thing. So I'll leave it at that.
They retreated into holes in the ground and lived as cave folk for many, many years until the ground above was somewhat livable. Upon their emergence, they wandered across the newly unfrozen isle to its furthest extents and established several dominions, namely the clans of Murther, the merchants of Sriu, the companies of the far west, and the Ashen men of the east, with these being the largest of many more territories that spanned Olfasu.
Um, so in regard to these different dominions, so like I said, this was in the primitive concept, and so the most I'll say is that some Ananyan um, tribes became or took over the role of the originally Thogan, not literally, not historically, but narratively. The Murtherans were never a literal group of Thogan. Um, it was a uh, all so because Thogans are of Rogganite stock, and so the Rogganites are you could think of them as a pantheon literally created by Horaclive to embody, in a way, his omnipresence. And with that fundamentally established, things that are descended or in the line of creation connected to the Rogganites, like the Thogan, like the Willows, like the Ananyan Ken. Um, they have an inclination fundamentally in their souls and bodies. They have an inclination toward exploration, not necessarily understanding, but exploration. And exploration, domination, and to multiply. And so this creates the reason why the Thogan spread across the globe um, or the continent of Olfasu so quickly, and why later, whenever their infrastructure started to crumble because of the rapid expansion, without the necessary government bureaucracy to maintain it, maintain order due to rampant crime and such. Um, they created the Ananikan to police their empire for them. Right. So the Murtherins are no longer a Thogan group or dominion. The Thogan were not unanimous in their dominion, but that is a part of a very old prehistory um, that isn't currently elaborated on and still being learned about by me, even. Uh, so the Murtherins are in reality in the current day. This history does not apply to the Thogan. It applies to an Ananian tribe that went up north, like I said before, that went up north after the departure of the Thogan. So they apply. That applies there. Same thing with the Syriax dominion that is mentioned. That is also, like I said, this Syriax. That's also an Ananian tribe that is nomadic, and down there in the desert of what is now Galakbaul. Um, and the Ashen Men of the East. That is the group that actually creates the nation of Olfasu. Not the world, not the continent, the nation. They're in the east, they're in the utter east of the continent, and they create Olfasu. And so that's the general interpretation. Thogan dominions, as of yet, are not actually a certain thing in universe anymore. In a similar way, the Cleocall were sort of a similar identity, and the Willows don't necessarily have to have civilizations. The Thogan just sort of spread everywhere very, very quickly. And so that's still uncertain. But essentially, you would be very safe if you just replace Thogan when it comes to these nations and dominions with Ananian, and you'd be pretty safe.
We will talk about Murther primarily in this video because 1, it is the Dominion that has the most information available, and 2, making a comprehensive guide on the entirety of the Dominions would be much longer than the entirety of this video, given the extensive yet still small amount of information we know about them. Murther, or as it is referred to during this ancient time, the clans, was and still is the northernmost territory of Olfasu. The Murtherins were known for being rather ornery and belligerent to their southern neighbors, especially with a group known as the Ones from the Fog. Not much is known about them, or really anything during this time period in detail, but it can be safely assumed that they were natives of the Mistlands, a nigh constantly foggy stretch of marshland above the current area of Sriyu. Aunt Nonap, a Thogish Murtherin historian who wrote about these events 200 or so years after the fact, referred to these natives as Brokis Gyandal, or monsters of moss.
I'll address two things quickly. One, early on in these videos, and from no longer, but early on in these videos, I would typically say that I was exploring or that we were looking into a book, right, or a world, because subtly I wanted to indicate that it potentially was not my own. Um, Mainly because I wanted to be exempt and sort of morally out of the way for if somebody did not like it. And I didn't want to claim it as my own, and so people could just hurl insults at a fake straw man that I put up, which I'm not doing anymore. This stuff is mine. Um, um, but in any case, yeah, that's the first one. But secondly, I want to discuss the monsters of moss, right? The monsters of moss were Brokis Galdal, were Owlins. Of course, replacing Thogan with Ananian. These were Ananian tribes in the north. And during those early days, there were the Owlins. And the Owlins were creatures that were born of uh, to put it nicely, illicit unions between fallen clivigen and mortals. So, and the clivigen being the originators of all insects, creeping things, crawling things, um, according to Kiahior, the Genesis myth. Um, and they took the form of insects. That was their most true form. Insects and other arthropods, right? And so the Allens were, in the simplest of terms, cryptid bug people. Um, the official term for them are the Morosh. Owlan is Owlon, more properly. I typically tend to anglicize it for some reason, even though it's my own thing. But Owlons were, that is the Ananian name for them. They call themselves the Mechmich. And so the Mechmich are the ones that have free will, in the concept of like they aren't directly under the control of the Clivigen anymore. Um, and the Marushmik uh, are the ones that are under the control of the Clivigen still to this day and often operate as their foot soldiers in wars and stuff like that. And their primary operating force in the world. So I just wanted to clarify that really quick.
According to Tendronus, an extremely reliable source, mind you, the natives merely used the moss as camouflage and were not literally creatures composed of moss. Though this is the same guy who claimed he was a more accurate source than his contemporaries because he was more religious than them. Quote, though I have been mightily used by the great duality and their associated allies for all manner of prophecy, holy literature, and any of such sort, be it in the form of miracles, magics, interpretations, guidance, counsel, preaching to alienated souls, enforcing the restrictions on the heretics, implementation of the prison systems, mandating of tithes, the building of penal cities, myriad explanations of exceeding complex subject matter regarding our faith, training of clergy members, small and large in rank, even to the extent of Ramothe, of the which I have held the position for some decades, working tirelessly for the synagogues and churches of Sriyu, upbraiding and rebuking false teachings, punishing incorrect doctrine and its practitioners, driving out the pagan influence from our region, and many, many more acts have I done in the name of Rommel and Othoth. With this, I announce my undisputed qualification and superiority over all other writers in religious and secular subjects. He also goes on to claim that he's even better than those of his caliber because he was born under the sign of a particular star. So take what he says with a grain of salt. In any case, Dendronus claims that these Mistlanders were ancient Owlans, which is objectively incorrect because the Owlans were actually descended from the Thogan. But his deductions were likely influenced by certain prejudices at the time, which he shamelessly expresses in his records. I find the notion of Owlans being referred to as men repulsive in nearly every notion, given their appearance, miasmic excretions, and chitinous exterior. But in the bipedal sense, as is directed in Nonep's Memoirs of Murder and Generals during the First Age, I suppose they could be considered thusly by the true men of the time.
Uh, Gotta love a little bit of misinformation from Tendronus here. Um, Love that guy. Uh, just wonderful. He's hilarious to me. I enjoy writing him. Um, but in any case, it's funny because he's so blatantly wrong about a lot of different stuff. But firstly, to address this, obviously, as I said before, this has been retconned, and the Allens are no longer descendants of the Thogan, um, but are in fact actually descendants of Clivigen and mortals. Uh, that's all I have to say.
His distaste is pretty clear. One of the generals from the record Tendronus mentioned described the way these Mistlanders moved, and is the only period description we have any knowledge of. And they walk most strangely, heavy-footed and sloppy. With the utmost difficulty, they traverse solid ground, which we have used mightily in their repulsion from our rightful lands. For they will but consume it upon their own desires and filthy tendencies, ever hungry and ravenous for our pure folk and thriving farmland. God has placed them in that hellhole for their vileness, yet we will take even that from them. That last line, "Yet we will take even that from them," was picked up as a slogan by extremist groups, radical nationalists, and democratic purists, who eventually became a group referred to as the Duumvirate Extremists Favoring Pro-Allen Removal and Termination, or the Depart group.
So this is originally part of that manuscript I was writing, depicting the first real history of the world. Um, yeah, just to be blunt, no. When I say no, I don't mean that there aren't extremist groups or bigoted or racist groups against Owlans. Uh, there absolutely are. Even deep, overarching bureaucratic oppression over the Allens. Um, but the enforcing groups don't have cute little names like Depart. Uh, I don't know why I wanted to put that in there. I think I just wanted to write a an acronym.
In the first age, 134, the Murtherans overtook the Mistlands and exterminated or pushed the Mistlanders away from the swamps. New immigrants flocked to the area and established the capital Ilon Kagoth, where a new and unique culture flourished due to their closeness to the Syrian brethren and the isolation from their home country. The Mistland Murtherans, now referred to as simply the Mistlanders, never split from the Greater Dominion, though their culture was quite different. Their architecture was little more than thatched or mud huts in favor of width rather than height, as the swarms of insects hover over the Mistlands, kept out of the range by the fog, which has too high of an air density for their fragile wings. Their naming conventions became quite different from their northern contemporaries, avoiding the typical tradition of ir or eos suffixes of given names. Some of the men and women began to take matronymics, in stark contrast to the patronymics or occupational surnames common to their prior home. Instead of constantly glory seeking through battle, craft, or wealth, they sought a more harmonious approach to the marshlands, given that they were highly hostile and easier to live with than fight against. Tinjanus writes that this harmonious living over time branched into a form of pantheism that still permeates among some of the present Mistlanders' religious beliefs. Their government also changed, as few of the nobility were among the waves of immigrants. So the former ruling class had little say in how the Mistlanders governed themselves. They opted for councils of wizened elders for village-scale issues and groups of representatives or ambassadors for inter-village relations. Each of these villages maintained their autonomy, and while a common identity was held, they were also highly individualistic in both village culture and enforced laws. The ambassadors were called the Oxpricklin, and small bands were sent every few years to the lands beyond the Dur Rigoth mountain range, which literally means southern range, and everyone in Olfasu that knows of it still calls it Dur Rigoth, meaning that regardless of your geographical location, you're still calling it south of you. Anyways, they consistently sent groups past the mountains for decades, with them at first finding no one to speak with save some nomads. Then they started to come back with injuries, and then killed comrades. A rare account of them reads, "For they returned wearing torn skin and clothing. With the warped sticks of the scarce desert trees they crushed themselves along the crags back to their homeland. There are barbarians beyond the mountains, monstrous creatures within the rocky hills, fierce fowl above them, and terrors beneath them. Of the barbarians received they harsh treatment from the foulest kings, a savagery known only by beasts fairly fit to be called men. From the monsters they received bloody limbs, severed ears, plucked eyes, and eaten brothers. From the foul they had their dead taken and their caravan harassed. From the terrors they were gifted with ambushes and rumblings that made the way warped and twisted past understanding. They wandered aimlessly for months. This made the Mistlanders wary of their violent southern neighbors, and, over time, even their northern rulers, whom they deemed tyrannical in many aspects. This led to their actions in the Stark Severance, which is a somewhat complicated part of Murtheran history. The name of Stark Severance to describe this civil war was not period accurate, as Monaldesheos called it this. We aren't entirely sure what the Murtherans of the period referred to it as. It's typically called the war, without fancy adjectives or anything like that, and the subsequent wars that also followed this naming trend, indicating that they did not care about specific wars or kept track of how many they waged. The severance began with a coup led by Igondeos Mur, the youngest son of the sixth king of the Dominion Undaither III, due to what was perceived as an unjust succession policy, improper discrimination, and general favoritism to another one of Undaither's sons, Undaither IV. Many noble families joined one side or the other, mostly trying to get as much out of the carnage as possible, be that reputation, standing, glory, riches, land, all of the above. There was a temporary resolution. They would split up the dominion between the two brothers, with Undaither the younger being granted Greater Murther, which was essentially all of it, and part of Harngrovith was given to Igondeos, which was a part of the eastern Mistlands bordering the coast. While unofficial, the citizens of Undaither's area took to calling themselves Undaiths, or true Murtherans, and those of Igondeos's called their country Igondaith, despite the fact that legally both were considered Murther and were under the same supreme authority, that being Undaither the Elder. The ruling class bickered incessantly and threw much of the people's taxes into worthless displays of power or constant weapons manufacturing as they prepared for another war, but in the process alienated their own populations. The people were put on rations that diminished and diminished as the government focused on siege weaponry and other stockpiling. Then, to top it all off, was an enormous famine caused by an enormous blizzard called Ukarothiok.
I would like to insert myself here. Again, two things. First thing, I apologize for the, in my opinion, nigh unlistenable quality of the recording here. I think I'm almost certain that at that time I had sat down, and because it was taking, you've got to understand, like, it took me much longer. This was an hour of workable footage. It took me probably 4 hours to get this working footage. But like back then, right? Obviously these intermediaries are like first take, without necessarily revision. But the primary thing I would like to say is that I had sat down and had a weird mic set up because I didn't have, like, on mic stands where they have that clamp and you put them on there and so it gives them stability. I didn't have that. I had like a bag and I had to precariously balance it over something. And as I moved, either the microphone would move or I would subconsciously move away or toward it, and causing that leaning back and forth. And I also didn't have a pop guard, which is why you're getting pops. But anyway, that's explanation of why it sounds so bad. But secondly, I would like to talk about the blizzard. That massive blizzard was caused by Rilchoy, which is what the Nine of the South called it. It was a massive hurricane. To them up north, it was a massive blizzard, where because of Ualtz, which was a specific city, originally a story in the first anthology I ever wrote, a story of great power and knowledge of the pneuma and the breath and how to use it as a mortal. But they were punished and judged, being swallowed up by a massive creature. Two creatures, in fact, that were fighting, and the two creatures fighting caused a massive hurricane. It was a whole thing. But I have since retconned it, and it was more of a massive storm that utterly destroyed Ualtz, but also ravaged across the world as well. But yes, that is the explanation for that.
There were some small uprisings during that period by a group known as the Patient Watch, an anarchist group, but the average citizen was simply waiting. Quote, "A few more years." That's what I said. Just a few more years, and they'll figure it all out. So I waited, and I waited. Watched as my daughter died from the cold. Kept waiting, and waiting. Watched my son die of hunger after giving his last meal to my sick wife. Kept waiting and waiting. My wife died. I fought then, for I had lost everything to wait for. This simultaneous explosion of grief and repressed anger bubbled and then exploded among the common people as a sea of men and women, armed with sickles and scythes, bows and arrows, rudimentary firearms, hoes, and all manner of farming or crafting implements, stormed the coastal city of Ulfrikith, and the then vacation city for the royal family, and trampled over every guard and nobleman in their way.
No, they did not have firearms. They did not have firearms yet. Um, yeah. Again, the retcon. I don't know where this came from. Yes. They did not have rudimentary firearms. That was a result of black fire, which came from the west several thousand years after this event. So firearms were not a thing back then. I think I had put it in there just for the sake of it, and I never revised it. But I revised it later, of course, but just never in the manuscript. And obviously now, as I am revising it currently. But anyway, yeah, no firearms, not yet.
Igondeos and his kin fled the city via some underground tunnels, the very bare bones prototype of the Eiffel Way, to the capital city of Igudith, where they barricaded and amassed troops for their protection. Aegondeos sent word to his brother Undaither in the west for amassed troops for their protection. Aegondeos sent word to his brother Undaither in the west for aid, as it was his only option now. But the message was intercepted by a young boy stowing away on the mailing transport. This boy was from the city of Igudith, and sought to make his way west to True Murther to find food or a job, not knowing that the True Murtherans were in similar straits to their eastern counterparts. He stumbled upon the letter, which was still sealed and labeled as information of the utmost secrecy. Aegondeos had not publicized the revolt among his citizens, and especially not in Igudith. No letters could come in or out save for by the king's hand. This was to prevent more of the populace feeling that they had traction and could overthrow him, and to have an uprising from within his capital and from without would spell certain doom. Therefore, this boy was ignorant as to the rebellion happening outside the walls. Once the boy read the confidential letter detailing the severity of the revolt and the king's desperation, he leapt off the transport when it entered True Mother's borders and ran to the nearest town, spreading the word abroad. The postman arrived at the western capital with no letter in tow and was quickly disregarded, as he himself did not know the information inside the letter. So, he went on his way back to the eastern capital, while Undaither the Younger's people stirred underneath his nose. Well, not literally, as the Thogan didn't have noses as we understand them. There were pores in their skin that received information from the air and also by touch, meaning that whatever they touched, they also tasted it. Anyways,
The Anon didn't have noses. I don't know what I was smoking. Perhaps the Thogan didn't have noses in actuality, and it were the pores. But considering the Thogan in this concept are actually Ananyan, yes, they did have noses.
as the postman returned, he found the armies of Igudith struggling to keep the hordes of commoners at bay. When he informed the king of the mistake, he was immediately executed, and Igondeos had a massive temper tantrum for 3 days before slipping into intense depression, as he knew his fate was sealed. Without any sort of assistance from the west, Igudith fell in a matter of 6 months. True Murther was now fighting their own battles against the revolutionaries due to the boy's information. In an ironic twist, Undaither sent a messenger to Aegondeos asking for assistance, but that courier was slaughtered by the eastern rebels, and with his death came the knowledge of the rebellion in the west. The eastern rebels felt a sense of camaraderie and empathy with their western cousins and marched on True Murther as well. With their defenses being assaulted from inside and out, the capital of Murdeosir fell quickly, and Undaither was maimed and executed for all the populace to see. What few members of the nobility of the royal house remained were stripped of their titles and forced to live the life of a lower class or rarely middle class citizen. The rebels swore never to have an overarching or extremely dominant form of government again, and made the head of each family the absolute authority over his kith and kin. There was a council made up of the most powerful clan heads, but checks and balances on land caps and other factors kept them from becoming too influential or martially strong. In the modern era, Murtherin is more of an ethnicity than a nationality. even though most Murtherans are not actually descended from the ancient Thogan. The class system is still the predominant form of government, despite many, many attempts to revise it. No monarchy exists in the North to the present day. And that's the Murtherans. That is pretty much all the information we know about them, and the rest of their history was too uneventful for Tinjanis to record, despite him saying that there is more literature to them. So maybe in time we'll get more information about it. Now, let's move on to their southern neighbors.
I took a little sleep and probably going to get some coffee here soon. Regarding the lack of history on the Murtherans, um, it's not necessarily that there's a lack of history. It's just at the time, of course, I didn't have anything more written, but I wanted to make a video. Um, I have written more now. Honestly, not as much as I would like. It's been a neglected area of the world. But what I do have is in regards to the Golyati, who have changed dramatically from their original inception. The Golyati are 11 to 13 foot tall at the high ranges. Beings, individuals, I call them giants, but they're not giants in the typical fiction term. They're giants in the concept that they're much bigger than a regular sized person, but not like 16, 17 feet tall. That's not a thing really for them. In any case, the Goyati and men are very closely related. Men in this case are actually a group of Goyatic dwarves who, due to insular dwarfism, as a result of the Exodus, shrank and became known as the Greshels, given that that was their patriarch, their original family progenitor. But another piece of Merlin history is that late in the Wilhelmskilkheim year of departure, age of departure, around about 3,150, I want to say, Ugor, which was a Golyati who took to enslaving men who were living in the archipelago to the northeast of Everlago, which is the isle on which the Golyati were created. He was exiled, but you've got to understand culturally, Golyati believe that in a sort of land spirit called Ruyat, and Ruyat is the concept of the land is sort of on a balance, and good and evil, depending on how much good or evil a land has been subjugated to, or that lies therein into that land, it determines the nature of that land. Ruyat is not good. Ruyat is not bad. Ruyat is determined by the denizens of the land. And the Golyati, because they were created to tend gardens and tend the land, they have this almost, they feel a connection to the land in a way. And they believe if they die, that they will become one with Ruyat. So dying in another land is essentially denying someone the afterlife with their ancestors, which is, that's the wanted goal. That's the wanted goal of a Golyati at the end of their life, is to do as much good in Ruyat as they can, and then reap the benefits and meet their kin whenever they die in the land. Partly why they actually bury their dead. They are the originators of that concept, by the way, in the world. The Ananyan never really did that. They would burn them. But yeah, so Ugor gets exiled, and he sails with him and some of his man slaves and some of his other people. And when I refer to men, I mean humankind. I'm using men in the archaic term for all mankind. But they are exiled and sent out west to the continent of Olfasu, um, and they first land in Olfas, which at the time was or where Olfas would be started. So, which Olfas is the capital city of Olfasu, and so they land there. They sell some slaves for food and water and bread, and they start working their way up the coast to the north, and eventually settle in the generally uninhabited area of northern Murther, just below the two major islands. So there's a sea between these islands on the top and the end of the mainland up at the north, and they call it the Segyan Sea because they took to themselves these new Goyati that were exiled. They called themselves Segyati, and they took to a different religious approach. That being that Ruyat or Ebelago or the spirit of the land is actually anywhere they go. And when before it was just restricted to Eberlago and that ancestral homeland, right? So that was their way of compensating and not feeling like they were going to never be with their, just basically just be trapped in the land forever with no one to speak to. Um, in any case, that's some more history on Murther. Um, but I'll get back to the majority of the video now.
There's comparatively little about any of the other dominions, next to nothing about the Ashen Men or the companies of the Far West, but there is something about Sriyu. Tinjana speaks mainly of the history of its religion and how the region had significance during his time, which isn't exactly what I'm looking for, but it's the Thogan period, so hardly anything is known about them in general. Some background information on Sriyu. It's a massive mesa. I'm talking 3 times the size of the US massive, and is north of the even more massive Chanting Dunes. It's got a whole lot of craters, mainly from asteroids, some from later Thogan immigrants. It's basically a wasteland.
In regard to the mesa of Sriu, um, the mesa is not 3 times the size of the US. I will say that it is 3 times the length of the US, but it is certainly not 3 times the size of the continental US. The chanting dunes that were also talked about are now referred to as Galak Baul, and they were a result of a battle between Akiramindan Dowage and while he was incarnate in the body of Ukthalum and Belial, who at the time was empowered by the Nonamich, and yeah, it was a whole thing. I would rather not get, if I started talking about it, I would start going. It's not important. But anyway, yeah. Galak Baul has several oases and stuff like that. It's not a complete barren wasteland, but it is for the majority a very harsh environment. Sriu is up north. It gets cold. Um, but because of the mountains over top of it and everything else, it does it is a mesa built in like a specific area above Galak Baul. It was before I started thinking from a literal um, geological sense with the world, as far as like how regions would form naturally. So it is still subject to change. I have not touched Ryu. It's still the capital place of the Duumvirate Church, but a lot of these meanings and definitions have changed. So the chanting dunes are actually Galak Baul.
Tindranas claims that the barbarians that assailed the Mistlanders were Alans, which again is incorrect. They were likely other Thogun acting without a dominion.
Nope, they were definitely Allens.
The Sithavuki were the largest empire in the region, and are described as being darker and shorter than their tall and shaggy northern brethren, with stronger brows and smooth skin. They had a strange obsession with currency and wealth, not necessarily for what it could give them, but the coinage itself. Their entire philosophy was oriented around constant material gain, not for their survival, as they lived very rudimentary lives with little luxury, but rather the concept of gain pushed them forward. Their economy focused on sheer dogged entrepreneurship, which led to a thriving meritocracy. These were the first among the Thogun to develop currency, coins specifically, not of metal, but of the bones of the Rathagan bird. These bones would be shaved smooth and carved into octodecagons, then engraved with all manner of designs, called Nun, as was the name of the city that established the first mint. These coins were called shavos, and were the basis on which all other future currencies were measured, such as the tanbrugi, the currency used by the Ananyankin during their reign until the Balaitalic era.
The the Balaitalic era was originally a much longer period of time. In the current iteration of the world, it is around 1 to 3 years, depending on who's telling the story. But the fundamental concept of them taking away their coinage, the coinage itself, and yeah, no, that didn't happen. The Tanbrugi are still the primary source of currency and almost a universal currency. Obviously, some obviously some cultures don't take Tanbrugi because it's just not they don't value it that way. They're still in the bartering phase for a lot of these cultures. So instead, they will take certain certain objects or goods in exchange for other objects or goods instead of trusting the value of you know a piece of metal. Typically, due to being exploited by other cultures in the past, that's typically a form of suspicion because the culture will say, "Oh, hey guys, look at this. This is really valuable, and if you trust this, later on, if you can use it to buy more stuff." To certain cultures, that is, do you really think I'm that gullible? You could just give me anything. So there's many cultures that simply don't take Tambrugi. So it's not a completely universal currency, but among large established nations, it is considered a universal currency.
These coins are essential, and the Noon especially, as many of the first mints of the coins were preserved by their makers for posterity. The discovery of these ancient shavos allows for the only reconstruction of their history that we know of. The quintessential shavo artifact is concavus, or rather, the individual the Noon portrays is called concavus, named so for the sizable dent in the right side of his forehead, and is the oldest known image of a Thogan. Tendranus provides an in-depth description of the engraving. Concavus wore an elaborate stole and an ephod over a lengthy cassock. Over the ephod were worn plates of armor, ceremonial in design, as they certainly would not have helped him much in battle. A large cloth with old Thogish lettering is wrapped around his waist, repeating the phrase Ad Hemeos Thotopair Ushgradeos, meaning king, warrior, God-fearer. A split in the cassock runs halfway down the legs and shows leggings underneath, embroidered with fine gold wire, forming the letterings Ilshapim an Ushkra, or I am ever running toward God. Concavus is not depicted with shoes, but jewels between his toes, set in place by layers of thin linen wraps. In his right hand he holds a bejeweled staff, at the head of which is carved an octadecagon with red and yellow alternating on the outside edge, and an orange sphere in the center. At the bottom is a flattened brass basin. In his left hand is the sculpted head of a humanoid figure, not a Thogan, but of some unknown people, whose mouth is half crooked into a frown and half upturned to a smile. Carved into the head is Prilne Mushoir, meaning the fair judge. It is here that Tendranus writes of their religion, called Thogism, which he claims is a heresy still practiced by the Skiven and few other peoples. Despite this, he says that the doctrines of Thogism, while heresy, are still sound in some aspects, and claims that some Thogans certainly ascended to Zoghood. He then goes on a massive tirade about the origins of the Duumvirate Church, the perceived similarities between it and Thogism itself, which he vehemently denies, but that's for later in the video because we're not there yet. There's not much more to say about the Sithavuki other than them being very rich, having connections with the companies of the Far West, starting religion, etc. Tendranus doesn't speak much about them, and mainly uses them as a segue into his own ideas, so for now we will skip ahead a couple 100,000 years.
So the Sithavuki were originally the Ananyan that lived in Galakbaul, but over time, these Ananyan moved out of the wasteland and started moving further west, right? They were called the Sithavuki for the time that they wandered in the desert, but as they went to the west, they joined up. Either the companies of the far west were them, but misunderstood as being from the same time period, or there were already Ananians in the west. That much is not sure, even to me. I would preferably have them be the first settlers in the far west. The Sithavuki, I mean. So afterward, men, the manslaves, right, escaped manslaves, fled into Galakbaul because it's very difficult to find somebody in the middle of a desert. And they started rudimentary civilizations there. As far as the as far as the time skip is concerned in this video, a couple 100,000 years. Yeah, there was originally a large prehistory before written history was a very big thing. So that's not really a thing. There is a prehistory, right? And I don't know how long it is. It's purposely meant to be vague. It's supposed to be this time of bliss. Nobody's really keeping track. The creators are still on the earth. The creators of mortals, I mean, are still on the earth. So mortals have a sense of absolute purpose. They're not left to their own devices. They don't really think about time in that aspect. So nobody knows how long this prehistory was. History really begins once these beings leave about 1,500 years before the age of departure. In which case, I want to say the Thogan leave. The Thogan leave. This current timeline that we're on right now are in the Ananyan, right? Of course. So they're not the Thogan. The Thogan leave in, I want to say, the 500 years before the Virumkagilkheim, the Age of Departure. And so the War of Matrimony lasts for those 500 years, give or take, which the War of Matrimony is a whole thing between Otniu and his illegitimate son, Notniuk, who becomes a major player in the world. But Otniu being a divine being, one of the original three pantheons, he's a Huronite. He has a son with a Clivigen woman who's a member of the Fallen Pantheon. Because he's trying to redeem their race. You know, he's trying to introduce good blood with bad blood. You know, anyway, because he was inspired by mortals on the earth who were advocates for interracial marriage, which, you know, obviously interracial marriage is fine, but for the ontological purposes of the divine pantheons, they were advised not to do that, not by God, by their own social order in the pantheons. But in any case, that's a whole another tangent that I could get down. But yeah, the Thogan leave. And so the Virumkagilkheim begins with them 500 years after they leave or so. Specifically, the fighting from the War of Matrimony in Kiakhor is what splits the continents, and that is what denotes and marks the beginning of the Age of Departure. Then So yeah, there's not 100,000 years between the Ananyan tribes. That's not that didn't happen. The entire year of departure takes about 3,000 years, and then we transition into the age of Olfas, which is about 510 years. Then we have Ahura versus Belial, which is a massive turning point in world history. Then you've got about 2,000 or so years in the age of prophets, and then you get to the age of twilight, which is the current present age of the narrative. So, yeah, not 100,000 year time skip.
So, there's a massive exodus of the Thogan at an undetermined point of history. We know it was during the First Age, but we have no idea of the actual date. They all just packed up and left. Their buildings crumbled due to age and not destruction. Their supplies rotted away, and all of their wealth still sits in vaults hidden beneath the ground or in very dangerous regions of Olfasu. They took nothing with them save for their own skin. No one knows where they went. Some say they had ventured across to other islands via the Eiffelway and then closed off that inter-ocean tunnel after they were across, but there's no evidence of it. And there's no reason for them to have left. So that's sort of a weird conclusion to come to. Any actual scholar will admit complete ignorance when it comes to anything regarding this event. The Skivenkiv lived during the reign of the Thogan according to their oral tradition, and are one of only two people groups that can claim to be native to Olfasu, the other being the Owlans, who may have been here before the Thogan arrived.
I use the term native here because I am still operating within the framework of Xamian and Latoran mortals. In the original framework that I had devised before a lot of the retconning and rewriting, the Litora, the Litora were actually the origin place of man and the Goyati, and that the Goyati had access to sort of this interdimensional gateway and travel way called the Sa way. And they would travel through this interdimensional route to Olfasu or Ifinu, right? The entire world. I decided this is so disjointed, it doesn't even make any sense. It's like I'm trying to do science fiction and fantasy at the same time. And it just felt like my world was contrived, very random. I had reasons for everything and why it existed, of course, but like, I almost can't help that. My brain doesn't work in the abstract or like whimsical, unfortunately. So, but yeah, I decided to condense it down, make reasons why the Goyati exist, why men exist. Made an entire retcon. Sometime in, I want to say, before the summer of 2025, I believe I made this retcon. So the second semester after my first year of college, the second semester of my first year of college, right? Because I recorded this original recording um, in January between in the Christmas break between the two semesters. But yes, I condensed it down. So these things, native, saying native, everyone's native to the place. There is a difference between native in the sense of meant to be here or designed to be here and ended up here. There is a difference there. So if you want to call it native in that difference, one, the Skivenkiv are actually the least native to Olfasu, or Ifinu, I mean. The Owlans are also the least native to Ifinu. They are among some of the oldest races, not the Skivenkiv. The Owlans or Mechmech or Marushmech, they are one of the oldest races. And they've got cousins in the west, the Shajajuans, and they are very, very old, existing for as long nearly as the Ananyan have. The Goyati are probably the oldest race, though. I want to say the Goyati are the oldest race. In any case, I was just wanting to clear that up of saying native versus non-native. They are absolutely all native to Ifinu. um, in a loose sense of where they didn't come from anywhere else necessarily.
The Skivenkiv worship an Olfasun deity named Xuminaquo, who commands them to consume the flesh of intelligent life at least once every month. They claim to be descended from him, and also the Thogan, somehow. Apparently, there was a Thogan that attempted to create a new race using his own genetic material and a strange fleshy stone that fell from the sky, and that's how they came to be, according to non-Incan research anyway. But all the Skivenkiv know is that Xuminaquo made them, and they are also partly Thogan. They are bizarre creatures with mouths in the place of their ears, which they call makai. They are not used for eating, rather they can hear a sound and perfectly mimic it using the makai. They live underground in sprawling hives, typically underneath cities, stealing refuse and bodies from graves or morgues. They're thought more of as pests, as they are not very physically imposing and are little more than glorified vultures to most people.
Zuminiquo is when I say Olfasun deity, um, he's actually a nonumich. I was almost going to say, if you read Kiahior, yeah, well, I haven't put Kiahior anywhere since it's largely unfinished. Which Kiahior, again, I think I said it before, is the Genesis myth, um, which is still in drafts. I'm still just making amends to it. I'm just stalling, really, as far as like whatever I want to like actually put it up somewhere on a website or something. But Kiahior, according to Kiahior, uh, Xuminaquo is a nonumich, which are, if you want to think about like, so this is where I have to delve into the metaphysics real quick of the world. So worship is a tangible thing. So like the mortals will are in a perfect world where everything is as it is needed to be. The mortals would give worship to their creators, and those beings would give their worship to their creators, right? Until it eventually reaches the apex, which is like Horrorcliff, right? Now, um, this is not a perfect world because any world with free will cannot be a perfect world. To have free will, you must have the ability to choose to do good or evil, and therefore evil as a concept, as a choice, must exist. So, in that concept, that's getting into like the actual philosophy of the world, like anyway. But how do I put this? Since worship is a physical thing, and that's a basis, right? So some of these more abstract concepts are actual physical things to supernatural beings, right? Of course, we can't see it, right? We can't see worship, right? But it's an exertion of the soul, and so it manifests on a higher plane, and therefore the supernatural beings can actually see it. They can take it, and they're meant to lift it up to their creators, right? But some will actively gorge themselves on it, right, to gain strength or gain power, which is a big deal. Massive violation of the divine hierarchy. In any case, since worship and some of these more abstract concepts are actually tangible, physical things in higher dimensional planes, um, sin or wrongdoing, evil, if you want to say, evil is a tangible thing. And therefore, whenever evil is a tangible thing and is done by beings who have the breath, right, which is this concept, this ability to make sapient life, even mortals have the breath, though it's so diluted now because you cannot ontologically make something equal to yourself unless it's via reproduction, right? But in and of yourself, to make something of equal strength to you in a soul sense doesn't make ontological sense, right? Like, speaking from a theological perspective, if God could make a God that is on par with him, he would no longer be God, and therefore that violates his own nature. So therefore, ontologically, you cannot, like, if you have the ability to make sapient life, it wouldn't make sense that you could make something ontologically greater than you. So the breath dilutes over at each subsequent creation, right? Until you get to a point where mortals, all we can do is imagine. Like, we have the breath to imagine things. We can create stories. We can do all this other stuff, but make art, feel inspiration, right? But that is the extent of our breath. But we still have it, right? So all beings, if they do evil, right? If they do evil, if the evil is done, then it does coalesce. It is a physical thing, and because it is imbued, because of beings having the breath, right? It actually gains a sort of life of its own. And that's what the nomic are. They are literal quasi ontological beings composed of literal evil and sin, that seep down through the cracks of the metaphysical of the world and the planes and everything else and coalesce in the bottom dregs of it. Right. Um, and these beings are the closest to pure evil that you can get in the setting, because they literally are nigh composed of pure evil. So Xumanaquo is one of these nomic, right? And he subtly influenced Skivril, which is the progenitor of the Skivenkiv. And the method by which he created the Skivenkiv, is at right now. I may go back and fix this, but in this current recording, I don't remember the exact method. But I'm almost certain it wasn't a stone. Regardless, he creates the Skivenkiv. And so they are part Skivril, they're part Ananian, and they are part Xumanaquo, because Xumanaquo helped him. Wait, no, Xumanaquo found them later. Yes, they're not part Xumanaquo. Xumanaquo found them later. Skivril created them, and then Xumanaquo found them because they needed a master. And so Xumanaquo influenced them and everything else. He gave them their form of scripture, which is the skin spread, and their entire society revolves around um, corpses and flesh and everything else, due to the fact that Xumanaquo has an obsession with actually incarnating into the physical world, so that he can create more sin and evil and make more of his own kind and make them stronger. Their one goal is to just make the entire universe just like them, to corrupt everything, because they are nigh pure evil. And so that's that. And I could go into like the historical implications and when like Xumanaquo like actually broke through and everything else. It was a big deal. Created the Bleeding Lands, an entire like small section on the eastern side of the Olfasun continent. And in any case, yeah, it was a big deal. But yeah, so whenever I say Xumanaquo and that they worship him, that's what I mean. And this has been a very big tangent. Back to the regular video.
Before a city is established, the Ananyankin and the other civilized Olfasuns will sweep the perimeter for holes or caves to ensure that there's no hive underneath their feet. The Skivenkiv are the boogeymen of children's stories and are the thought-of reasons for bumps in the night. They have little history of their own, but in the early history of Olfas, they intermarried with some of the Ananyankin noble families, which caused these branches to be disinherited, if not outright slain. The descendants of these unions were the Skivenon, a much more rare breed of creature, and as part of Ananyankin, they qualified as citizens during those times, but were restricted from positions in law enforcement, education, and politics. The greatest thing the Skivenkiv can lay claim to, if they would want to, is the creation of the Bleeding Lands. Skivenkiv made for great unpaid interns, and the capture of them from hive cities was an occupation in and of itself. A group of these intern employers attempted to raid and raze an unnamed mountain hive to great success, but apparently this place was holy ground to Xumanaquo, so he was a bit mad at them stomping around, killing people, and then a religious zealot named Alvux, who Xumanaquo really respected, called out to him. So as you do, Xumanaquo splits open a tear in reality, incarnates as a massive creature the size of a mountain, with an enormous head, which is the same head as a baby, like a human baby, not any other creature's baby, a human baby head, brings down a divine hammer on the slavers and turns the entire mountain range into a semi-permeated plane of reality where his children can roam Olfasu. Yeah, average stuff.
This is one of my favorite things in the entire world because like the origin of why this exists is just hilarious to me. Um Obviously some of the details got changed. Obviously Zuniko doesn't break through reality on his own. It was a it was an entire thing with Alvux who that they were there working to open a rift, right? The unnamed mountain hive was actually a ground for pilgrims, extreme zealots, and cultists, and they were actively trying to open a Terran reality. The slavers just happened to be there. And yeah, so they got there, started, but anyway, they tear open the rift, and Xuanico is able to come through. Now, the reason this exists is because I was um I was DMing a game with my younger brother. It was just him, and he was doing whatever. He never played a tabletop before, and so I have often taken to placing stress testing. Yes, stress testing the accuracy and immersion of the world by DMing it for people. I actually have a current campaign with some of my friends right now. Um, but by stress testing it, right, making sure it makes sense, that it can be immersed into. Um, but yes, he was playing, and his character was Alvex, and he just manages to roll a ton of nat 20s to get this perfect because he literally I forget what it's called now, but for the cleric, divine intervention, right? And I was like, for one time, you can have your god do something, right? And he said, so I can only use this one time in my life, right? And and I said, yes, you can only use it one time in your entire playthrough with this character. And he's just, he's gung ho. So he goes, yes, absolutely, I'm going to use it. And so that is what happened. And that was Exuminiquo's judgment, which Exuminiquo, whenever he did incarnate, he was like I said, he was, when I say the size of a mountain, I don't mean literally like the size of like one of the Himalayan mountains. I'm talking more about maybe large hill size. We're talking maybe 50, 55 feet tall. And of course, he's got this massive baby head. And I thought it was hilarious whenever I made it because I had to describe Zuminiquo's appearance on the fly. And so a bunch of things just kind of got mishmashed together. And I felt it came about so naturally that I really didn't want to change it. But yeah, he has this really skinny body, but this really big baby head. And empty sockets, that's typically a trait of them. And he has this big hammer, and it's composed of the reeling bodies of however many souls have been sacrificed to him, or eaten in his name, or like a bunch of different stuff, like crazy stuff like that. And yeah, so he swings the hammer, and literally on like in history, whenever he swings that hammer and hits the ground, it's a flash that can be seen across the entire world. Like every culture has their tale of this flash that happened at this one point. But yes, it creates the bleeding lands, which is a very thin layer of reality where more none of it can come through. Um, in the Kyohyor, it's addressed, right? And in the Kyohyor, it's addressed. So Horiclive actively judges him. It's kind of crazy because Horiclive actively intervenes with this scenario right here. I don't think he directly intervenes with anything or speaks audibly to any other event in the history. but he speaks to Zuma, to quote here, um, and banishes him and all of the individuals that were coming out of this Terran reality, banishes them back into their dark realm or pits. But the land itself is absolutely corrupted. You know, it's called the Bleeding Lands for a reason. A lot of red, a lot of almost like a sick leprous white. It's a very very specific place, very specific biome. Uh, it's an interesting place. Uh, I find it super fascinating to see like this almost liminal area of the world. But yeah, like that's the history there, which it's not as fleshed out as like maybe it should be. But I felt like I needed to include it because it was just so over the top and insane. Um, that may eventually be retconned. It may eventually be retconned, but I love that moment, so I decided to integrate it. But yeah, that's the basic background of that. So I'll leave it at that.
To explain the Owlins, we have to talk about the Thogan again. One of the things that they left behind in their exodus was a biological supercomputer in the form of a fungus named Macel. Macel was stored in a cave until it was discovered by an unwitting Owlin child who fell in. Macel took this opportunity to spread its spores on his chitin. The patriarch, as that child is now called, passed on the spores to his descendants, and eventually the entire population formed a symbiotic relationship with Macel. It changed their biology over the years and gave them specific organs, such as spore germinators and ovulators, present in males and females, respectively. This mixes the spores of Macel with the genetic material of both parents and ensures and ensures the child will have its blessing and pass it on to the next generation.
Yes, the my lifelong love of mycology is kind of coming out here. But in any case, yeah. So Macel, Rick Condit, Macel is not a biological supercomputer. As fun as that sounds, I at the same time I can't start getting. I was being very contrived and very disjointed in the nature and themes of my world because ultimately I've always wanted to make both a more traditional fantasy esque setting, but I also love science fiction. And so I've since matured as a writer and have decided that these two things they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but for my own sake, I can't switch gears that quickly and keep it all consistent. I mean, I could, but for the sake of thematic purity and narrative consistency, um, I have separated science fiction and this more traditional fantasy, um, which really is not even traditional fantasy. It doesn't have elves and dwarves and all these other things. Uh, it's just it just is what it is. Technically, it's fantasy. But yeah, science fiction has now been separated into its own world, Achimakandan. And so that's something I work on in the background sometimes, as well as another setting that I am preparing for another concept and project that I would may be working on here soon. But in any case, uh, the Macel, yes, Macel. Macel was a Chronite, and he saw the condition of the Marojmich, which, of course, were the descendants of Clivigen and mortals who were corrupted beyond repair. They basically couldn't think for themselves, and so Macel said, "Okay, I'm going to go down there, and in an act of benevolence, I'm going to give these give these people a way out." And so he goes down, treads upon the earth, and which in the form he is associated with fungus. He is a sort of fungus whenever he manifests, um, and that's why there's spores and everything else on the Mechmich. But yes, he uses this as a way to liberate them from the at least mental corruption that kept them tied to their masters against their will. and they can make their own decisions. They are still a corrupted race in the most ontological of senses, but they can make their own choices. They're not like de facto evil. Um, so they are liberated. And they are actually like they've been guided a lot through the years, and they're generally a good people on average. But not all of them though. Like the Moroshmik, actually the Mechmik were all of the Moroshmik. Then they rebelled against the Clivigen, which these fallen Clivigen are called Gogolothi. Um, and so they rebel against the Gogolothi, and they manage to escape, right, and just go out onto the surface world from these underground tunnels and everything else where the Gogolothi hide. And so the Gogolothi just make more Moroshmik, right? But now there is a population of free Moroshmik, and they take the name of Mechmik after Mesel, sons of Mesel. And yeah, so that is the actual history of like what they are, as far as like what Mesel actually is, and his relationship to the Owlans. He is more so of their of their god, you could say. In any case, yes, I am going to leave it at that.
The Owlans' chitinous exteriors and underlying muscle tissue are laced with mycelium from specialized internal organs created by Maycel spores directing stem cells during fetal development. As they grow, the mycelium underneath their skin begins to develop fruiting bodies after being triggered during rushes of hormones, typically during puberty. These fruiting bodies act as a natural armor and also redirects the owlin's natural excretory system to the fruiting bodies, where they will excrete the waste as an aerosolized mist. Maycel can observe the world through the mycelium that permeates an owlin's muscle fibers and most other tissues, allowing it to understand the state of the individual asset, which it calls each individual owlin, and adjust certain body processes accordingly. The mycelium also allows for quick wound and injury recovery, and in some cases, almost lizard-like regeneration, though these mutated strains of mycelium spores are very rare. This mist, which the Ananyankin called miasma, can cause strange diseases and foreign creatures. This led to massive genocides against the Owlins by the Ananyan, which reduced the Owlins' numbers drastically. Luckily, the Owlins were protected by a treaty between all civilized people regarding the rights to be imparted to all intelligent creatures. This inhibited the Ananyankin from their genocides, but the majority of Owlins were still within holding camps and were given citizenship. At least that's what people on the outside thought. These Owlins that live in cities are treated poorly. Not directly, like mass physical persecution by the government, but though some citizens have taken it upon themselves to punish them. The government performs it on a more emotional, religious, and cultural scale. Worship of Maycel is strictly forbidden and will be met with vigorous punishment, be it flogging, other methods of torture, or death, and at times all three. An Owlin who is seen in public by a government official with a certain threshold of standing, typically a member of law enforcement, is required to search the Owlin for spores or fruiting bodies, regardless of any visible manifestation. The process by which they do this is called the pruning, and it is typically referred to as a religious process, by which other species, and only devotees of the Dumvrit, which includes mostly Ananyankin, ensure the safety of their citizens from the miasma. They wear masks, often called miasmasks, which are made from various plant life, but are fashioned into the head of a decaying gallbird to express their disdain for both the owlin and the duty of performing the pruning itself. Robesmen, the colloquial term for a law enforcement officer, carry a small pot of incense mixed with either tar or water and a type of stick sponge called an autanol, literally to pray with shame, or an actual pruner. The owlins undergoing pruning must undress themselves entirely wherever they are, be it in a public area or not, and be inspected for growths. They will be meticulously scrubbed, head to toe, and given a DOC, or a decree of cleanliness for the day, which prevents them from being pruned more than one time. Note that this is simply a notice. More sadistic or perverted robesmen can or will ignore it. The DOC is stamped onto the forehead, with the date and time of stamping included in the ink, and is to be washed off the next day.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I completely forgot about this. Um, I knew, like, I remember writing a story about, like, from the perspective of an owl, in a very short, little bitty first person narration of like what life was like, and I ended up just writing a bunch of stuff, really crazy stuff, um, about like a Ananian culture and like the way that they treated the Allens. And while some of it is almost cartoonish in the way that they were treated, I went overly in depth for the sake of discovery. And what I mean by that is like I went overly in depth so that I could have enough material to prune into something. Prune. I don't know what I'm talking about. To prune into a suitable fashion. So I tend to over detail everything so that then I can cut back later. This is one of those examples where there's a lot of detail and I just never trimmed it. Um, but yes, the Owlens are quite marginalized in many respects. They have very low population numbers, and the main reason for this sort of cleaning or pruning is for the sake of keeping them under control. As with the spores and everything, it gives them a greater physical prowess as a people. And so once you learn how to remove the spores, like also it's not just for the fact of that, it's also because the spores create the miasma. And so it's also one of those things where you can see from the Ananian side why they would not want these guys to have these growths, because it could end up, causing more plagues and diseases. But they don't have to be so sadistic with it, you know. But anyway, yeah. I forgot about this part, and so I'm learning about it just as you are, I guess. Um, though I will have to say, just at this moment, I'm realizing how absolutely atrocious this original recording was. I think that's why I didn't want to adapt it into a video, because it didn't meet my audio quality standards, and I didn't want to have to re-record it because it took like 3 or 4 hours to actually record this. And even that's one of those things. This is bad quality, and it took me like that long to record it. Which, anyway, that was just from me being a novice and everything else. But which I'm still a novice. I'll still put that on the tin. That I'm a novice and I don't really know fully what I'm doing yet. But I've gotten more experience now. Which I'm using a headset mic right now. I'm not really caring at this moment for these revisions. Um, Future videos, of course, will have better audio quality. I guarantee it. Even if I have to use this headset mic, I'm waiting on a much better mic. But currently, this revision mic, this headset mic, will have to do. I'll just insulate the room around me, go into a closet or something like that, and hope that gets rid of the echo and all that. Anyway, yeah, fun times with Allen persecution and marginalized groups.
Owlens are required to attend duumvirate religious centers, but are not allowed among the general populace. Rather, they are to stand outside for hours at a time, listening to any sermons or readings. Insigs, a term for the temple authorities, which is in reference to their uniform's iconography, will question attending Owlens on the sermon/readings to ensure attention and comprehension. Owlens do not have proper citizenship and are considered unnaturalized immigrants or outright aliens, regardless of whether they are native born or not. Thus, they do not have rights in the same capacity as their naturalized peers, and at times, even actual immigrants. This is due to a private policy enforced by most Ananian governments in regard to biohazardous citizens, a title that only applies to Owlens and very select populations with numbers only in the double digits. Owlens cannot express any form of individual opinion. They cannot haggle prices, advertised or not. They cannot have any sort of representation in court, save for an Ananian jury. They cannot live in the same areas as other population groups. They cannot shop at foreign markets frequented by Ananian and other citizen demographics. They must shop at designated Owlen districts. They cannot leave the city or country, as if they did, the Ananian government, enforcing this policy, would be found violating the Free People's Concord, which requires equal treatment of all people groups in Olfasu. With the advent of the Balayatolic occupation and the new empire that overtook the old governments at the beginning of the Balayatolic era, many of the policies created and upheld by the native countries of Olfasu were annulled, including the Free People's Concord. This led to mass enslavement of many groups and genocides becoming a legal way to prevent uprisings from troublesome demographics. That's a bit of a look into the future, but we'll get there eventually. Those are the Allens, a really interesting group of people to me, despite the slightly lacking history, given their status as a discriminated minority in Olfasu. At least by the Ananinkins, they received that type of treatment.
Now that the Allens are out of the way, at least what was recorded there, uh, I seem to be oddly uh, not ascertaining, what am I talking about? Portraying that these are all the groups that there are. I would like to posit here that obviously there are way more people groups than what are mentioned here. It's even subcultures, sub ethnicities. Just for men, there's like a ton of different nations. I am just mainly addressing the primary races, if that makes any sense. I am addressing the primary races and not any not any subgroups because that would make the video even longer. That and many of these subgroups didn't exist at that time a year ago, as I took more of an interest in culture and how that would guide stories and character development. So, as I go into this next section about the Ananian, I seem to talk about them almost like they are the pinnacle, which they are definitely the group with the most recorded history and likely the biggest influence on the Olfasan continent. Um, but come the age of twilight, men become a who are also a marginalized group, but not nearly as much as the Allens. Men discover the West, and which or Yagufasu, that the Ananians call it, and or Rejfasu. Actually, yeah, Rejfasu. Yagufasu is a different term. Rejfasu is literally the land of twilight, right? And or world of twilight because of setting in the West. So I don't know. I'm trying to think of words to say here. My brain is sort of blanking out. Um, but yeah, there are way more groups, and the Shajajuans weren't even a thing. The Shajajuans are probably one of the most culturally interesting groups in the setting, or fleshed out even, and they weren't even a thing here. So maybe I'll make another video on them, but for now, just beware that these are not all of the. These are just the primary race groups.
All right, we are now the Ananinkins, the greatest and most powerful group in the modern era, and the group with arguably the most recorded history of all other groups. They were a group of Bunrayahan that were deported from their realm due to their mixture with the Ananians, a cyclopean race of beings hunted to extinction after the Ananian deportation. I know that's very complicated, but the kin is indicative that they are kin to the Ananian.
Incorrect, as you know from listening to these revisions. The Ananian are their own people created by the Thogan to police their empire. They are not from some other realm like Bunraya, which Bunraya exists, but it's an island, and they did not come from that island. They are native to Olfasu, their continent. This was a very old concept with their one-eyed nature. They have one eye. They're cyclopean, and that was meant to be the reasoning for that was because of admixture with a cyclopean race in their native realm of wherever they were from. So, but yeah, that was completely retconned, and now they are creations of the Thogan and native to Olfasu. So, take like I said, obviously this entire video is meant to be taken with a grain of salt. It's meant to be just to be an archival of this old recording because I didn't just want it to go to waste. If anything, I've actually recorded more revising it than is actually here. But I have just, I don't know, I just wanted to revise it and put it out there for my own sake. Anyway, yeah, just so you know, Anonians, not in any way from another realm. They were created in Olfasu.
Anyway, by all accounts, they should have died, this being the Anankan, they should have died once they arrived, given that Olfasu was a desolate wasteland at the time. But over 25,000 years or so of their prehistory later, they established the city of Olfas, which the island was named for, and not the other way around.
I'm gonna have to do a lot of revision here. Olfasu is not an island. It is not an island. It is a continent. It was originally an island because the entire world was a group of archipelagos, but group of islands in an archipelago. However, now they are full continents and everything else. Um, so yes, and Olfasu was not a barren wasteland. It was not a barren wasteland. It was its own thing. The coffee's kicking in, if you can't tell. But yes, it was not a desolate wasteland. It was a flourishing actually land. And there was not a 25,000 year prehistory. From when they were deported from their original realm. There was no deportation. They were not deported from their realm. They were here. There is a legend of a 25,000 year prehistory in the Duumvirate Church, but that legend is to ascertain, not ascertain, I keep using that word. It is to convince the people of their cultural and historical superiority. It is a fake narrative designed by the Duumvirate Church to make premise for them being ontologically and historically superior to other races. So yeah, that's where the 25,000 year prehistory, that's what it developed into. There's not an actual definite 25,000 year prehistory where they just wandered around. It was about 3,000 years that they wandered around, not 25,000.
They wanted a king and chose a man named Davo, renamed him the Bonner, which means king or ruler, and thus began their people's saga. Bonner Davo I had a son named, well, Davo II. His actual name was Higrathi, and he was an illegitimate child that Davo I had with another noblewoman, Grunhild Bunajov. Now, Bunajov was married, and her husband Anthan was quite perceptive and immediately knew that Higrathi was not his son. He called out Davo I and demanded that he pay for his trespasses, which Davo I didn't. But at the very least, it sullied his reputation and trustworthiness among his servants and close friends. Anthan mysteriously died a month after his confrontation with Davo. Very coincidental. In any case, Davo took the child as his own and legitimized him, which caused an uproar among the populace, but at that time, it was a silent one, as no one was going to challenge Davo and his military. Davo I died, and his son Higrathi, now Davo II, was to rule. This was the moment in which some of the noble houses and common folk revolted, as this child was not to be their king, and if anything, being as he was part Bunajov, it should be them that rule over the country next. However, many loyalists to Davo I and his will maintained the right of Higrathi to reign. This led to a civil war that saw the rebels defeated and their exile to the Growland Range. We will talk about these exiles later. Higrathi grows up into Davo II and becomes a proponent of innovation, sparking advances in the domestication of animals, advancement in agriculture, and the breeding of the first bioships.
Oh, no, 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 no. There are no bioships. No, there are no bioships. The concept of bioships was just because the sea in the old concept from some of the first, it's actually from the first poem I wrote about the world, believe it or not. It was a sea of tar. And they needed the bioships to sail across the sea, which bioships were literal creatures bred for the sake of piloting them from the inside via specialized canals and organs. It was an entire, like I said early on, I was really trying to do this science fiction fantasy thing, and it was really, really disjointed and very random uh, thematically. So yeah, no bioships. I I had even held bioships up to the thing, but I had killed so many of my darlings, uh, and then found out I didn't really even love them to begin with. But in any case, um, yes, 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 yes. There are no bioships, and yeah, the Growlins will be talked about later.
Davil II had 2 children with his wife, Davil III and Cephabon, and several more with his concubines, those children being Growla Vesifol and the Ugravo brothers. Together, the descendants of all, save for the Davil line, are called the Second Families. This next part is from the older video on Olfasu that I did, which does a decent job of summarizing this early royal history. So I will be re-recording the scripted audio as is. Davil III suffered a traumatic injury as a child during a minor coup against his father, in which some of the offenders attacked his mother. While fighting back, she dropped him from a height off of the palace stairs. This handicapped him mentally, and as Cephabon grew, he felt sure that despite his brother's seniority, he would absolutely be the heir to the throne, as his genius was unrivaled in the realm. However, his father favored his brother, and explicitly gave the throne to Davil III in his will. It's uncertain whether Cephabon simply relented to his father's command, or if he caused many of the rebellions and deaths in the family after his invalid brother's rise to power. The sources conflict on both concepts.
Cephabon is actually, I don't think I explained it in the video, but the general family tree is that Cephabon is the younger brother of Davil III, and both are the children of Davil II. Um, Cephabon becomes very important. He has become very important recently in the narrative, um, because he is one of the first individuals. He is the first quote unquote incarnation, not an actual incarnation, but more of a possession of Akiro in the world. And one of his children, a daughter, also named Growla, um, becomes very important in the end time prophecy for some of the families and such things like that, which I will not go into detail here because some of it is actually stuff I want to be revealed in a narrative and a story. So I will leave it at that.
Davil III never truly ruled, and the nobles knew it. In truth, it was his wife, Fail Bunajov. Yes, they are related, puppeteering her husband throughout his reign. From here, we skip several generations to a more detailed period of history, to the 370 460 BBM type era, with Davo the Eighth and his children, Davo the Ninth, Sevenir, Lamia, Oamir, Gamid, Giundiri, and debatably Aquando and Condor.
This guy is actually very important too. Dabo the Eighth was known as the Eternal King. I think I talked about that later in the video. But he had a brother, a half brother, because his father, Dabo the Seventh, um, had an affair with a Greshel woman, so a human woman, and from that union came Shulov or Dav Shulov, uh, and he became a very important figure in the west of Olfasu. Not as far west as, like, obviously Ridge Fosu or the Land of Twilight, where the Shajajuans are, but the Middle Lands, Skalak Baul, right? And he became a very important figure in taking Hildriok. Very, very, very prominent figure, and an example of the Akrian and Beliatolic descendants combating each other throughout history. Um, but yes, his story is very, very interesting, and he is actually in a distant ancestor of one of the main characters of the story that I'm currently writing, Passage to the West.
These children and their descendants are known as the Eighth Families. Davo the Ninth only had a daughter named Agam, who married a noble named Akhenabunaj. Still a Bunajo, by the way. Yes, they are related. And thus began the succession factions. Those who support the current family line from Akhenab are called traditionalists. Ogists, sometimes spitefully called ogres, are a group of political figures and scholars that hold the belief that when the house changed from Davo to Bunaj, the crown should have passed to Og's descendants, and that 7 years incest was not coded as a breach of law at the time, which is true. Multiple essays and historical sources back it up. Thus, it was not a legitimate reason to denounce the line's inheritance. For this reason, Og's most senior male descendant should sit on the throne. Most Ogists are not militant. It's more so an intellectual acknowledgement that the current system of government is technically incorrect, but has been established for so long that it would take a monumental effort to change it.
So Og became incredibly important, even currently, right? Recently, within the past few weeks, Og has become incredibly important, um, as he is one of the three children of Ogathalam, which, if you remember previously, is actually the second and full incarnation of Akiro into the world. So yes, these children are direct descendants of Akiro, who was a semi-divine being. They are legitimately demigods. Um, so it was a big deal, and even if they didn't realize it, like the Obanpak was one of the children, and he was born, and it was very clear that he was a member of the kin, uh, who are like descendants of Nanyuk, right? Very clear that he was part of the kin, and just from his malformed appearance whenever he was born, the other two they looked normal. In fact, they didn't even really manifest anything. So yeah, it was a whole thing, and yeah, there's a lot of political background. I mentioned that 7 years incest. It was kind of a big deal. And part of the reason Akiro even chose it because Akiro knew that being incarnated as a being like this would make it easier for him and it would probably give him more power. It's a whole complicated metaphysical thing, especially with incarnation. The metaphysics of it are very very complicated, but I'll leave it at that for now. That know that Og is one of the descendants of Ogathalam or Akiro, and they are very important, which is probably a very good thing that they don't sit on the throne right now.
Though there are militant subsets, typically descendants of Og, that consider themselves or someone close to them and their family to be the senior heir, but the lack of valid genealogical evidence for periods of this family's history make it difficult to know anything for certain. Oamirans hold the notion that Oamir, third son of Davo VIII, and his descendants are the rightful heirs to the throne. They maintain 7 years' denouncement and claim seniority in a male-only line. The only reason they even have a following is due to a very rare surname, Oami or Oam, which they claim it has its etymology traced back to Oamir. According to records, Oamir was never married and had no children, and he lived as a hermit in the Tevenim forest for most of his life. The Anankin bearing these supposed derivative surnames are from Tevenim or are Tevenir, so the story lines up there, but historians say that the name was actually taken by a family of nomads that were saved by from an open pock far from his herd by Oamir. After slaying the beast, the nomads swore fealty to him and managed his crops until he died, taking the surname in remembrance of him. Therefore, Oamir has no actual biological descendants, yet that does not stop them from still proponing, just keeping this supposed legend going. Sephobonists hold that Sephobon should have been the line of inheritance. Most find Sephobonists like flat earthers, perpetuating an ancient argument that has been dismissed and disproved repeatedly. Balats wish for the Balas family to hold more power due to their legendary ancestor, Jundiri Balas I. But very few are foolish enough to think that they are to be kings.
Originally in the video, I had in the script, I had an entire rant about the Duumvirate Church, but that is actually a separate video now. I remember that I split that chunk off because it was more manageable, and I made it its own thing. So if you want to go watch that, I'll probably pin it somewhere in this video. But yes, there's an entire video on the Duumvirate Church. I'm not going to explain it again here. Because that other version I assume is going to be more cleaned up. And I'm going to skip straight to the first Grillonic War, and which is going to be fun. I don't think I've ever covered this one.
Alright, now, since several hundred years have passed since the founding of Olfas, let's get into the First Grillonic War. In order to fully understand the Grillonic Wars, we've got to talk about the Growlins. Remember that group of exiles that was kicked out to the Growlin range? Yeah, well, they caught the attention of one of the kin, the oldest kin, in fact, Kuro Mindawage. The range was entirely inhospitable. It grew nothing and did not have any fauna, so the exiles had few options when it came to food. Luckily, Akiro saw their predicament and gave them a benevolent gift, his patronage. He changed their biology to suit their new environment in exchange for their loyal worship and continual genetic improvement/evolution, as he wanted them to become his mighty foot soldiers should the need ever rise. Their diet changed to that of a lithivore, needing only to consume minerals to survive and drink the water of the rivers, which, even among other equally strange creatures, is considered miraculous. Describing a growlin is like describing water. Yeah, I mean, it's clear and wet, but it can take nearly any shape, and the growlins are the same, save for the clear and wet part, maybe. Akiro provided them with something they call the All Blood, which allows them to have offspring with any creature. Stop right now, you heathen. I know what you're thinking. And no, the growlins aren't freaks like you. They have a code of honor and conceive their children by a mystical means if that creature isn't intelligent. And if the creature is intelligent, they still do it mystically, even if it isn't humanoid. And even then, when they're humanoid, before the thought even pops in your head, consent is included with the package. There are exceptions to every rule, though.
Yeah. The Growlins are one of the more wild groups that I ever wrote. Yeah, I was, like I said, a very quick rant there whenever I was speaking, but I'll slow it down just for the sake of it because I didn't want it to I didn't want the disclaimer to take up a bunch of time in the video. But at this point, I don't really care. I want to explain this a little bit more so that it's not misunderstood. Yes, the All Blood is fundamentally a crazy concept in which the Growlins, in order to accrue genetic information more properly, will purposefully have children with different creatures in order to gain their genetic material or mutations or whatever you want to call it for the sake of improving their race. Now, one of the biggest and most obvious problems or things that could be discussed about this would be the implications of relations with non-humanoid entities, which is uncomfortable to most people, and including me. I'm not like that's just one of the concepts that would be in the All Blood, and so to prevent potential misconstrual or approaching topics that would be very, very taboo to even approach, uh, they conceive things mystically. It's a very it's a bit of it's a bit of a hard pill to swallow, but they are meant to be a very, very intense, savage, uh, brutal culture. Um, where strength is everything, and regardless of where that strength comes from, it doesn't matter. It is in their nature to do so and to become strong. Um, So, yes, I am aware of all of the potential implications that come from this. And yes, I am aware that even though, I even put it in the disclaimer, there are exceptions to every rule, there are absolutely, due to the All Blood, there are absolutely atrocities committed in the sake of improving the Growlins race. And for a long time, I thought about writing it out for the because it almost feels like it's just cheap shock value. Um, but I am still on the fence as to whether I want to write it out or not because I didn't want it to be as simple as something like, oh, well, they just take the genetic material mystically and then apply it to their own because that would make it feel almost cheap, almost unearned, and it wouldn't be thematically appropriate. Um, so I sort of opted for this sort of thing, and yes, obviously the implications are there. I don't need to spell them out for you. So, but yes, that is. I had to give another more detailed disclaimer here for the obvious reasons. Just so people wouldn't get a false idea of it. I am whenever I write the Growlins or talk about the Growlins, it is a thing of where you walk a tight line and you kind of try to avoid certain topics whenever you talk about them. They're meant to sit in the background. They're not meant to be up front and in the spectacle. So no, I am not trying to just elicit shock value for the sake of shock value whenever I write these. It is meant to be a background understood thing rather than an implicit depicted thing, if that makes any sense.
This enables them to comply with Akiro's command to become the most physically dominant creatures in all of known existence, which they aren't. Yet. They breed only for the sake of children and not for enjoyment, and being the offspring of a Growlin is like speedrunning life, to put it nicely. To give you an idea of what happens to the average Growlin infant, a litter of them, which can be upwards of 20 or so, are put in a large pen with a single lactating abandi, which is a skinless, six-legged camel-like creature, with all of its teats being occupied by its own calves, save for one. The newborn Growlin that reaches the abandi will live. The others, don't. This sole survivor will be unceremoniously tossed off of a cliff. If it lives, it will then be boiled in the fat of its brethren to infuse it with strength. These trials continue until a new generation of the Growlins are reduced to 5% of the starting population, and then during adolescence, this new generation will be sent to engage in organized skirmishes with other groups to weed out the weak. This will reduce the 5% down to half. Only 2.5% of Growlins make it to adulthood, and that's by design. Every adult Growlin that you see or read about has undergone these trials. Now, imagine an army of them. The leader of the Growlins, Ashilo, reigned at the summit of the 2,000 steps for many years and saw as his people grew stronger, yet had no fruits for their generations of labor. He thought of the old stories that his ancestors passed down about the fertile and plentiful lands outside of the steep crags and barren mountains of the range. Their population, despite the culling trials, was still growing at a rapid rate, and soon they would be in a crisis of overpopulation. They can enforce stricter culling requirements, but that would require overriding the current shamanic organization that was the center for religious worship. Ashilo, for the first time in the Growlins' history, sent a scouting party outside of the range to see what existed. The Growlins weren't entirely ignorant of their neighbors. No one would dare travel through the range's river systems, but they would dump trash. And from that refuse, the Growlins could determine that there were quite a few flourishing civilizations around them. Olfas to the east, from which their largest river ran, Pronvoy to the west, from which an offshoot of the Horan River flowed to the ocean, and a relatively new civilization named Krevan that was started at the bottom of the Ovos Peninsula by a descendant of Og.
Yeah, this section clearly has some of the worst audio um, out of the video. Um, but yes, I was waiting until I found a place where I feel like I could actually talk about some stuff. Um, yep, the Growlins have that selective eugenics concept program that they perform with every generation, and yet at the same time, everything else, it's a whole thing. Again, I'm not trying to elicit shock value. It is simply a result of them becoming strong, becoming fulfilling that Akurin duty, which is to become the strongest creatures. And in existence. As for Cravan here, and everything else like that, this is a an old concept. I'm not sure if I even want Cravan. Cravan is probably not going to exist. Uh, it was a highly specific thing invented for a specific purpose that it no longer needs serve. So it probably will no longer actually exist. But anyway, back to the video.
The scouting party returned, bearing news of a plentiful land to the west, that being Pronvoy, which was actually in a state of drought and famine, but to the Growlans was absolutely thriving. That was enough to convince Ashilo to raise his armies and march them across the mountains to the valley country. Pronvoy stood no chance and was steamrolled by the Growlan forces. However, many messengers managed to escape and tell as many countries as possible about this new force. Ashilo was not afraid and quite liked the new land that he had conquered. He was not going to give it up easily. The Queen of Olfas at this time, Grumai, rallied her armies in response to this news, as did the scholars of Kervan and the Duumvirate Church in Kankar. In short, the Growlans wrecked house until they didn't, because they had another strange doctrine from Akiro. They could not use any form of martial technology, no bows and arrows, not even a stick, because they would become reliant on it. So when the scholars of Krevan came in with wondrous creations that could decimate swaths of the battlefield, even the Growlans couldn't stop it. In short, the Growlans lost, retreated back to their range, and the world was never the same. Can you tell I'm getting a bit tired? There's a decent amount of information about this, but I cannot possibly cover the entirety of the war in this video. It would have to be its own dedicated thing. 2,500 years after the First Grulonic War, Akiro Minden Dowage, the eldest son of Notniuk, and the god of the Growlans, decided to retake the Latora, which his father had desired for the millennia. He and his myriad children invaded the Micro-Latora and began fighting through the Goyati Empire in an effort to reach their capital plane, the Medialitis, and specifically Sojal, modern-day Earth, from which Belial reigned. The leader of the Goyati, reigned.
I think you can hear from that one continual paragraph, maybe, of how different things actually are now. Uh, yeah, Ankuro did not ever leave. He was going to go to Kiahyur, which is another name for, like, it's also called harmony, or basically a concept for the higher realm of heaven, uh, where the pantheons dwell. He was going to go there, and he was going to retake what his father deemed, father being Notniuk, deemed as his birthright, because Otniu had, for a time, actually taken over the Hronite capital of Hronguren and held it for some time until he was decimated by the Medians. But the Medialitis, the Latora, those don't exist anymore. The Goyati weren't from Kiahyur. They were already native. They didn't live up there. Belial was a Segyati who was empowered by Anonymik and then killed Akiro on the earth. There wasn't this massive war up in heaven. He didn't even get there. Akiro didn't even get there. He made his way out west to Galak Baul, and they fought somewhere near modern-day Hildriak. It was a complete retcon from that original concept. So, I think you can see the progression here from that old to this new sort of concept where it's much more self-enclosed and less multi-dimensional or multi-universal in scale. There was no need for it to be that large. But in anyway, I wanted to make that clear and to elaborate that because this is such a drastic departure from what it is now.
Akiro summoned the Growlans to fight in his wars, and they did a terrific job wiping the floor with nearly everyone and everything that they came across. The Micro-Latoran armies of Belial lost more and more battles to the point that Belial decided to ask for help from Olfasu. Thus, the Ananenkin are now present in the Latora. The entire war is far too much for me to cover, but here are the main points. Jundiri Balas is here. Not the first Jundiri, but one of his descendants, and he cleans house as a high-ranking officer. He gets in good with Belial himself and stations a Goliath presence on Olfasu. Akiro makes it to Sojil and is killed by Belial in the capital city of Abvikal. How was the god killed, you ask? Well, Akiro incarnated and his avatar fought Belial. Belial had a wellspring soul, meaning that he had the soul of a god, but not the body of one, thus allowing him to defeat divine beings. While Akiro's avatar could have been killed by any mortal, not that it would have, but they could have killed him technically. However, they would not have killed his actual self. Belial could kill his actual self through the avatar. Anyway, Akiro dies, enough said. That and he had a child with Belial's daughter, but that's neither here nor there. Not-Niuk gains an intense hatred of Earth because of this. Belial occupies Olfasu to spread his influence, which leads to what is known as the Beliatolic era.
No. Yeah, we all know from the revision. Yeah, that's not how that went. Um, it is somewhat similar in some aspects, like the fact that just replace Belial's wellspring soul with a nomic empowerment in which he gave his soul of where that he will absolutely be going down into those pits with those beings, the nomic, for all of eternity, in exchange for material power in the world, right? And so that is how he is able to actually attack Akiro's Ontos or soul, whatever you want to call it, and actually defeat him as a god, because he has another quasi equal ontological being influencing his soul and is overriding his natural state. And so, because his soul is technically already a nomic soul, it's complicated, sort of. But in any case, yeah, he kills Akiro at Hildriok, not in the Maculatora, never existed. Jundiri, I haven't decided whether Jundiri Balas, one of the descendants of the Jundiri Balas the First, was actually one of the foot soldiers in Belial's army. I have not decided that yet. But they certainly didn't establish a Goliath presence there. The only Goliath presence that would be down there would be because Belial was just there. You know, like he had moved down from Murder early on and had maybe moved through the mesas and stuff like that, and nobody could stop him. And he just finds Akiro and kills him. You know, so Goliathi presence is more from a dispersal of his actual army and stuff like that, taking root in the deserts or in the east. So that's how the Goliatic presence gets kind of established in the east, but is still predominantly Ananian. But yes, in any case, Belial does kill Akiro, and it's a whole thing. But this all originated from an old story, Abvikal, of the same name. I had it was one of the first books I published. I would not advise reading it; it was very bad. Plus, I think I've taken it off of Amazon. But do not read it; it's bad. It is very bad. I will disclaim it. It is very bad. And it was my first attempt at an actual lengthy narrative. Well, not lengthy. It was like 100 pages. It was not that long. It was a short story. It was not a long story. I don't know what I'm talking about there. But yes, it came from that concept because I had to explain how Belial, a crazy being like that, was frozen in the Antarctic underneath all this ice in a massive city called Abvikal. And yeah, it was. I had to explain it in the world, and so that was how I did so. That Belial was an ancient ancestor of all human beings, and that he lived on Earth, which is called Sojil, and he reigned and had to fight against these extra-dimensional invaders, which were the people from Ifinu and Akiro and Nanyuk and all these other crazy beings. And so that was the original cosmology of the world. But of course, it has been drastically retconned. And while those old stories still do exist, I think it would actually be interesting, maybe, to keep that continuity as like a separate canon or something. But yeah, in the actual thing, it's been retconned dramatically. So I'll leave it at that. It's sort of like a primitive stage of the cosmology.
The Growlins' god is now dead, and their religion died with him. They emerged from the range and began living among the general populace. Their bloodlines became diluted, and the culling stopped. The Goliaths treated these enemies with a surprising amount of honor and respect, mainly because they acknowledged their strength, something that was foreign to the Ananyankin. To the Ananyankin, an enemy worthy of respect is worthy of death. There's not much information about this war, other than the main armies came from some traditionalists still living in the Growling Range. They saw what their kind was becoming and decided that instead of peace, they would die with some semblance of honor. It was a very small scale war led by a descendant of Ashilo, and they were quickly quelled by the deft actions of the incredible Goliath general Thrikith, who was ironically named after Akiro's son. Okay, that was a very simplified overview of the history of Olfasu. This is by no means comprehensive. We would be here for quite a while longer if it was, but I hope you found it interesting. I didn't cover any of the fully functional languages spoken by the Alfasuns and Growlins, nor did I cover some of the more nuanced events in regard to the Ifa Way, the other countries of Olfasu, and much of the intrigue that still plagues the nobility of the Isle. In any case, until next time.
Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. My massive 2.5 hour long archive of this old recording. To be honest, I don't know how to close it, but I just want to say that I do believe that I will be making more YouTube videos in the future with a much higher audio and hopefully video quality with better script writing. I recognize certain parts of my script were absolutely very confusing and likely would be misunderstood if explained to another person. And that was because early on in my script writing, I would assume people. I was not used to explaining my world to other people because I'm going to be honest. Most of the time, when you try to engage in a casual 2 hour talk with somebody about a subject they know nothing about, but you know a ridiculous amount about, it doesn't really end up being a very enjoyable conversation for most people. So I did not have much experience explaining it. I knew how it worked in my mind, but explaining it to another person was a bit difficult. And so there were certain aspects that I would just assume that people understood that they didn't. So my scripts were quite confusing, and I will attempt to rectify that going forward. Um, and But yes, this is a very old. This is a year old recording. This was never really even meant to see the light of day, but I have rather enjoyed it. I may not even put pictures up. That's one of the biggest things I struggle with my videos is putting pictures up because with all of this different concepts and everything else, I struggle to find specific pictures to even describe any of it. So often, um, I put text up in like a black box, which I suppose I'm still developing my video editing style. But my skills are very, very new and novice and primitive, so I uh, I don't quite know what I'm doing if it's not immediately apparent. It's a skill I have not really trained. So I hope that I will grow better and I will grow in my ability to do these videos. I enjoy being very casual with people, at least in these video formats. I don't like acting as if it's super polished and if it's going to be this super high quality thing. I do want it to be high quality, like don't get me wrong, but I think over taking yourself too seriously is it risks burnout. It really does. If you take yourself too seriously, if I stress over every little bitty thing in my thing, I'm like, oh my word, I'm going to be, a garbage person at this. I'm going to portray my work in a horrible way. It's like, dude, like, I've learned that don't take yourself too seriously. Um, just have fun with it. Like, if you aren't having fun with it, I don't know why you're doing it. Obviously, if you're working for something, you kind of need money. You need to live. So yeah, okay, you may not be having fun with it, but with something like this, it's meant to be a hobby. It's not meant to be a stressor. Okay, this is not meant to be that way. So I don't really know where I'm going. I'm just talking right now because nobody's going to be at the end of this video anyway. I don't think anyway. If you are here, wow, you are an impressive human being. I do not know many people that would sit and listen through a poorly recorded neurodivergent rant about a fictional world that is described in poor detail and in poor structure with constant changes in tone and revision throughout. I applaud you for your attention span. Most people do not have your attention span, and I respect you quite a bit for the fact that you are willing to listen. Or you put it on background, which I don't know why you would put it on background. Um, I don't know why you would put this on background as far as like background noise. But if you did, or you fell asleep, thank you for the watch time anyway. Uh, I appreciate it. Um, and yes, more videos coming soon. I think I am already writing and getting some ideas for new content. One of the most recent videos I posted on this channel was about the Olfasun language, the very bare basics of it, and surprisingly, it got more views than I thought it would. I got more views than I thought it would, which, like, for me, like, that's like 30 something views. That's a lot of views for something about a language, a conlang. Like, and I've got several of those. So if that's something that interests people, I'll explain it. I'll go for it. I'm an absolute linguistic nerd. I love that stuff. Um, and any of the systems, like, I know that sounds weird, but I'm an absolute nerd over my own stuff, and I hope that doesn't sound arrogant. But I don't want to make something that I myself am not interested in. You know, why would I make something that I myself am not interested in or passionate about? Um, so I don't know. I think it's a healthy relationship to one's creation if you are passionate about it and like it and kind of nerd out over it. Um, but thank you for listening so far and suffering through this along with me because trust me, I was cringing more than a few times myself. In fact, I'm almost cringing right now at the fact that I'm recording myself doing this, and I've sat here for a long time, just listening and revising. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to be honest. I don't think that I am going to put many pictures up because of the fact that it's just not really a thing. I don't really care. Um, it would take me way too long. I don't have the time for that right now. I have other videos I could work on that would be better and better recorded. So this one is just going to be left like this, I suppose, and not really, like I said, very raw, very untouched, very unpolished, almost like a just an audio recording, basically with little to no pictures. So thank you for listening, and I guess see you next time in the next video that I do. Maybe I don't know when it'll come out, but it should be soon. See you later.